Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Just before we begin, just to let you know that everyone has been muted, and I hope that you can hear me. We've just done a test just before we started the message, the presentation, and it seems to be working fine. So I think we should be okay. As everyone's on mute, if you have any questions, please can you type your questions into the questions box, and we will do our best to answer them at the end. My colleague Fiona is managing the questions as and when they come in, and we will do our best to answer them at the end. If there is a onslaught of questions during this webinar, then we will follow up via email if we don't have time to get through to all of them. Okay, let's begin. So, did you know that the European data economy will be worth 829 billion euros by the end of 2020? In this session, we're going to examine the use of authoritative data sets, why they should be trusted, and how we can maintain their quality to ensure the trust is continued. My name is Phil Ridley, and I'm a senior business development consultant in the public sector and government division at One Spatial. And I'll be talking through a presentation and live demonstration, after which there'll be an opportunity for some questions. This is our agenda for the session and our roadmap for the topics that we're going to cover. We're going to start off by looking at how do we define authoritative data. We're going to look at why do we need to maintain trust in authoritative data. We're going to look at the changes to maintaining and updating authoritative data and how the world around us is changing. And then we're going to consider some actions to take to keep up with those changes in society and technology. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to follow up with some questions at the end. Before we move on to defining what authoritative data is, I want us to think about what is the value of authoritative data and the value that third-party data gives to authoritative data. I think we can all agree that it is when the value of authoritative data is recognized across an organization that the quality of the data becomes a priority. The value of the authoritative data is where and how it can be used, therefore having it as an accurate representation of the real world, but also from a diverse range of data sources increases the depth of the data and therefore the potential use cases, thus increasing the overall value. I've tried to define this on the screen in a quote, well, from myself, but putting it into a sentence, third-party data exploits technology capabilities to create a rich and diverse authoritative data set that is an accurate, dynamic, and current representation of the physical world. We will cover this in more detail, but government organizations are often looked to as providers of authoritative data. With the development of technology and GIS becoming more mainstream, there is an opportunity to use data from a rich and diverse set of sources to add value to your authoritative data set. Although the increase in collaboration with authoritative data can lead to many benefits, there are some processes we must also consider. So what is authoritative data? When talking about spatial data quality, we often describe data as the authoritative data or the important and trusted data. There is value in using phrases such as these as they highlight that the data we are working with are important to organizations and are key to organizational operations. We have all seen it many times in our careers where important data has not been maintained to standard, and this can lead to all sorts of problems such as false positives or missing data when making operational decisions. At a number of conferences I've been to recently, there have been many discussions both on the value of authoritative data and the need to start to improve our collaboration between organizations through partnerships and linked data, to name two examples. These conferences, however, have highlighted to me that the authoritative data and the data that is important and needs to be trusted are in fact different, and we're starting to mix the terms. As these collaboration models start to evolve, it is becoming increasingly important to ensure that whilst we want all data to be of a high standard, why it is important to maintain a high quality of our authoritative data in particular. At the third international workshop on spatial data quality, Krumpovets et al. Proposed a new definition of authoritative data. And I quote, authoritative data is data provided by or on behalf of a public body or authority, which has an official mandate to provide and sustain it, that is based on a set of criteria to ensure known data quality, and that is required to be used or aimed towards extensive use and reuse within the public sector and society as a whole. I've put a link to the paper on this slide, and we will be sending the slides out after this webinar. It's a very interesting paper, and I would strongly recommend that you go and have a read of that. It's not very long, but it's a very interesting paper about the difference between authoritative and trusted data. From this definition, a key point for me is that authoritative data has a mandated use, and it is this mandated use which creates value for authoritative data and that vital importance for its quality to be maintained. This mandated use could include in government operations and legal cases, for example, where processes and evidence used to make key decisions could come under immense scrutiny. At the AGI Scotland event, just before travelling became a lot more restricted, I was involved in many discussions about which data is the authoritative data in linked data. And interestingly, a presentation from Alan Howie, the Chief Data Officer at Registers of Scotland, said his objective was to have the Registers of Scotland data as the authoritative data as an anchor in these linked data networks that are ever growing and expanding across Scotland and maybe even the wider UK. The mandated use scenario is obvious why the quality of the data needs to be maintained, but why for the linked data? If you have your authoritative data as the single source of truth for multiple other data sets to build a network with, inaccuracies in that single source of truth will have a disastrous exponential knock-on effect down the process throughout these linked data networks. We're beginning to see data being opened up in Europe, an example being the new EU directive to make it compulsory to provide open and free access to the most crucial publicly funded geospatial and Earth observation data for use and reuse. These wider data networks and reuse of data are fantastic for creating opportunities for collaboration across the whole continent. However, having authoritative data as a single source of truth at the heart of these ever-growing and ever larger networks creates an ever-growing risk of the wider damage should the single source of truth not be accurate and fit for purpose. And it's another example of how these collaboration networks of data are growing and growing and growing across countries, continents, and maybe even the world. And government organizations are increasingly being looked to provide the authoritative data sets, which are the anchor for these ever-growing networks. And therefore, it's getting even more important that the data in these authoritative data sets are accurate and fit for purpose. In recent years, as technology has advanced, GIS has become more mainstream in everyday life. 10 or 15 years ago, you would have been learning GIS skills in a university class, which people now take as part of their everyday life with a smartphone. For example, when I was at university, doing routing analysis was an exciting and new thing, and now it's just a standard thing which you can do on Google Maps on your smartphone. This means that we are starting to see a shift in how data is or could be collected. Traditionally, those responsible for collecting data for authoritative data sets were the national mapping agencies, who were maintaining the data as well. Surveyors were tasked to survey areas in a carefully scheduled plan to ensure that the authoritative data is valid and current, i.e. up to date. And that still happens today. But what is changing is the development of new authoritative data sources or new data sources which could contribute to government's authoritative data sets. We're starting to see independent surveyors contributing data. These independent surveyors could be contractors, building developers who are either volunteering updates, so they've built a new development and they know that they need to submit this data in, or the National Mapping Agency or the government body may be aware of a significant development and due to resourcing, surveyors may request that the developers submit data of the new buildings that have been built. We also see other volunteer surveyor schemes. OpenStreetMap is a fantastic example of volunteers going out and surveying their local area and capturing data and things that are important to them in their local area. We're also seeing as climate change and biodiversity is becoming ever more prominent in society as a problem that we need to combat. We're starting to see independent surveyor groups going out and monitoring habitats in their local areas. And they might be submitting this data in either voluntarily or at the request of central government organizations who are monitoring the environment across the country. But it's not just people who are actively collecting the data and are aware that they are collecting the data. With technologies such as smartphones and social media and bank cards, as we move towards a cashless society, all of these are collecting data, spatial data, in our everyday lives, whether we know it or not. And a recent example of how this data is being used for evidence-based decision making is in the current tracking of people's movement on public or lack of movement on public transport using smart cards during the current COVID-19 lockdown. These new sources of data are powerful enhancements to national authoritative data sets, as well as improving the currency of the data. So surveyors are sending in new buildings as soon as they're built rather than waiting for the next scheduled National Mapping Agency survey. Other data sources can help us start to understand how people use and move through space, as well as an accurate representation of creating an accurate representation of the physical world. However, after all these years of trained surveyors accurately collecting high-quality data to build a high-quality authoritative data set, a sudden ingest of data from multiple sources, which, to be honest, are probably of varying quality, can be a threat to the quality of the authoritative data set. As discussed previously, authoritative data needs to have its quality maintained, and this therefore poses a problem and a risk to our authoritative data sets. So what should we do? There's loads of things that we can do, but I want to get the ball rolling with ways that we can start thinking by highlighting 3 key action points which we could take to protect the trust of and value of and quality of our authoritative data whilst using third-party data suppliers. First, we need to define the standards and rules for your authoritative data set. I think we can all agree that there is nothing more frustrating than just being told, no, not good enough, with no guidance on what is wrong, as well as adhering to multiple organizational standards and international standards, such as ISO standards like 19158 on third-party data supplies. We need to write out our interpretation of these standards in a clear and simple message for our suppliers. Maybe a simple thing to do, but sometimes that we could, as we're so absorbed in geospatial data every day in our careers, sometimes with these new volunteer surveyors, these things may not be an obvious thing to do. On that, we need to communicate these standards with your data suppliers. As I just said, this may sound like an obvious thing to do, but when living and breathing geospatial every day, sometimes things which become common sense are not immediately obvious to others. There's no harm in clearly outlining the standards that the authoritative data is set against, and therefore any data contributions that need to adhere to these standards. And ideally, if we can write these out in as plain English as possible, that also will make things easier. And speaking of making things easy, we need to make it easy for our data suppliers to meet our standards. Laying down standards is all well and good. However, if there are any complications, your data suppliers are unlikely to cooperate. We're just creating another thing for them to worry about and another problem for them to have to deal with every day. One Spatial have been working with a number of clients who want to make this process as simple as possible. In our government vertical, we realize that every country and probably multiple organizations are going to be in different scenarios. And so we combine our professional services team with a diverse toolkit in order to be able to build solutions to help you maintain the quality of your authoritative data. Different organizations implement these actions using different technology solutions. Some use data quality and job management solutions such as OneSMS to ensure that data captured in the field is tasked to keep data current, but also validated and quality assured. And others use data quality portals such as our latest solution, One Data Gateway. I don't have time to show you all the examples I could, but I do want to show you one example to show how these theory points that we've been talking about could be put into practice. And this is when things get very exciting, because whilst on a lockdown Wi-Fi hotspot, I'm going to attempt a live demo. So here we go. So you can see on the screen in front of me One Data Gateway, which is, as I was talking about, it's the idea of having a data portal to make things as simple as possible to be submitting data in for your data suppliers into a national data set. We've got here as a project manager a series of projects on the screen, and as a project manager we may be receiving data from multiple data sources, each of which potentially have bespoke requirements. Assigning projects to users means that we are simplifying the process for data suppliers, as they will only see the projects that they're involved with. Again, going back to that third point, we're making it as simple as possible. So if I take an example here where we're going to be submitting some new data into our national data set, there are various processes here, which I won't go into too much detail because I'm wary of time, but during this process of setting up a project, we would configure the rule set, the type of data that we're expecting to be receiving from the supplier. And this comes from a simple bit of consultancy, rather than having to go through this every single time that we're receiving data. We can do this just once, and then it's an automated process. We assign our rules about how we want the data to be received, and that covers this information point here, which it comes back to, as I was saying, communicating the standards to our data suppliers. So you'll see here, I've written out an example of what the project's about. It's all about submitting new buildings into our national data set. And I've laid out 8 rules there, which I want the data to be adhered to. I've just noticed a typo, so I'm going to show you how it can be edited just whilst I fix that out of the corner of my eye. So I've laid out 8 rules and standards there. So for example, I want to make sure that all the building polygons do not overlap existing polygons. Some of them are self-explanatory. We don't want to be expecting new buildings to be in water, because otherwise that's going to be a pretty unpleasant house to be living in. So I've made note of that, and also if I've got a branded document, I can also upload that there if we've got a strict marketing team who want to make sure that everything is on brand. Okay. So I'm clicking save here. And I want to then show you how this then could be submitted. Okay, so I'm on my assignments here. This is the login view if you're someone who's going to be submitting data in. So we've got some example data here from Ireland, and this is skin of the earth data. So just in case you haven't come across this before, it's one smooth layer across the globe, and you'll see here that I've unticked layers, but you'll see there's nothing underneath. So click back on artificial and existing buildings. Now this is an ESRI shapefile, which are the new buildings that we need to submit into the skin of the earth dataset. And you can imagine digitizing out of the vegetation layer, the light green here, and also the artificial layer, exactly those building layouts, and then digitizing in exactly the new building layouts to make sure that it fits exactly with no gaps. It's going to be a really lengthy and fiddly and complex process that's prone to human error. So let's see if using Data Gateway and the rules can help make that process simple and easy for the data suppliers, but also simple and easy for us as data receivers. So I'm the data supplier here. I want to be submitting some data. I'm going to click a new submission. I can drag and drop, but for this, I'm going to select my data here. And I'm going to move through to the next process. Now, what we're doing here is we're checking that the data schema we're receiving is the same as all of the previous submissions. This could be because if the data supplier has dramatically changed their schema, this could have an impact on the rules and may mean that may cause some errors. So this is just a safety buffer check to make sure that we're receiving the data as we expect. You'll see here that everything is mapped and all set to go. But if I wanted to double check the schema mapping, I could, and we can do some minor edits here. So for example, if geo change had changed to being geo underscore change in the target class schema, we can make that small edit here if we want to. But everything is all set. We're all good to go. So we're going to click continue and we're going to make our submission. Now we're processing through the rule set here. You'll see we've opened the data and we've gone through the rules and the actions, and all 7 features, the 7 new buildings that we want to submit have been tasked as valid. So rather than going through days and days and days of having to check that, communicating with the data supplier, then getting frustrated because we're coming across as really pedantic and annoying, we've just run it, the data suppliers run it through, and you'll see here in 3 seconds, it's come through and the process is all okay. I'll just go back to my QGIS to check that the data is updated, and then voila, there we go. The magic trick has worked, as they say. You'll see that the new buildings have appeared in the buildings layer, and let's just check that they've cut a layer in the skin of the earth data. There you go. You'll see the skin of the earth data has also expanded as cut out. We've taken a process that would probably take days and highly prone to error, and we've now done that in a matter of 3 seconds. Just one other thing I want to talk to you about before moving back to the slide is this dashboard feature here as well. As well as making the process as easy as possible, we want to be educating our data suppliers, and we want to offer them training wherever possible, because not only do we want our national data sets to be national authoritative data sets to be of standard because of their mandated use, as I said earlier, we want to make sure that the source data, because let's be honest, we want all data to be of as good a quality as possible. So by checking these dashboards, we can start to see different projects that have got a high success rate of data being accepted. Are there some projects or certain suppliers who are maybe not performing so well, so need some training on standards and how that can affect your data submissions? Are there certain rules which are frequently failing, and do we therefore need to offer some training in what do we mean by buildings not being in water? People may have difficulty understanding that, and so we'd go out and offer some training about what that rule means and what that standard means. And I think this is a really good way of understanding our data suppliers and helping improve that communication. Just swap back to my presentation. So there are examples where we've started to use this in a data supply chain. An example which, although it's not a government mapping agency example, I really like it as it gives a good real world example, is with the new building of a high-speed rail route through the UK, HS2. They're using the data gateway portal. Their surveyors are working on the project, are going out and doing environmental assessments of the proposed building route. So they're checking habitats, are there habitats of endangered species, and they're collecting in all this information. And the decision makers need to be confident in the data they're receiving from these surveys, because it's influencing their key decisions in where they need to build HS2 and the railways. Because as you can imagine, the headlines, if they built HS2 and wiped out an endangered species, would be catastrophic. So that's where this mandated use and the reliance on having confidence in the data being submitted in from third-party organizations or data suppliers is key. So it's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour in the last 20 minutes or so, but some topics which we have covered. We've covered the increasing use of third-party data in authoritative data sets and how collaboration can create rich and diverse authoritative data. However, with the mandated use of authoritative data, it is of paramount importance that the quality of these authoritative data sets is maintained. We've discussed different processes to balance the benefits which third-party data can bring to authoritative data. and processes to mitigate the risk to our authoritative data sets. I think it's worth just saying that we would welcome ongoing discussions with anyone on this webinar, either academic or to discuss technology solutions for maintaining the quality of authoritative data. We're involved in multiple research projects at the moment, and so we're really up for having these sorts of discussions, because we want to make sure that the research and development that we're doing with the technology is actually matching the needs for national mapping agencies and government organizations. My contact details are on the screen, and if you want to make a note of those, and we will follow up with a recording of this presentation, which will also have contact details included. My colleague Fiona is on the call and has been collecting your questions. If you have any questions now which you haven't had a chance to write in whilst I've been speaking, please do either raise a virtual hand on the webinar system, or I'll type them in the questions window. Fiona, do we have any questions?
Hi, Phil. We've had a few questions. So the first one is, there are a number of common standards for data quality across the EU. Do templated versions of this technology exist with those standards already built in?
Thanks, Fiona. That's a great question. We've not had a need for that just yet, as each time we've deployed this technology, it's been with a bespoke rule set for a specific project, such as the railway one I just mentioned earlier. But it's certainly possible to build templates of common rule sets, which then can be added to or tweaked for bespoke projects. Perhaps if you're aware of other organizations in a similar situation to you, and you maybe want to collaborate on this. One of the good things about taking a rules-based approach to these data quality processes is that you build a library of plain English rules which anyone can pick up, read and understand. Not only does this make it easier to communicate with your data suppliers, but those receiving the data, and also if there's any change of personnel within your organization, and you're not inheriting a large complicated set of code or workspaces, you're collecting in a simple plain English list of rules and instructions.
Great. We've had another question that asks, can you handle and check 3D data in one data gateway?
Yes, it is technology. The technology is possible. Again, we've not had a reason to do it for a client yet, but we are running various 3D data quality operations, not using Data Gateway, but using one of our other products in development. And we've actually had some blue sky research and development processes in-house by combining that 3D capability in one data gateway. So yes, the technology is there. It's not being required yet, but we'd be more than happy to embark on a research project with anyone who's looking at doing that. So yes, technically possible, not be needed yet, but can be deployed when required.
Okay, and the last question in the questions box is, you mentioned that authoritative data is data that has a mandated use. Are there ways a similar approach could be adopted for sending data out to various partner bodies?
Yes, I guess as gatekeepers or owners of authoritative data sets, it does have a mandated use. So we're not only collecting data in, we're also going to be sending data out. You can apply a similar process, but in reverse. Ideally, however, I'd say it would be best to clean your central authoritative data set first, which mitigates the need of having to do this about every single time. However, I can see how the process in reverse would improve efficiencies should your data receivers need their data in a different schema, for example. You might want to be looking to do an automated process that way around. So yes, that is also technically possible.
Okay, great. There's no other questions in the questions box.
Perfect. Well, if there's no further questions, then I think it's best to say if you do think of a question after this webinar, please do feel free to follow up with us. Again, My contact details are on there, and we will be sending out a recording of this with further contact details. We would welcome discussions, again, as I said, either academic or looking at technology solutions. We would welcome those contacts. And all that's left is to say thank you very much for your attention and your time.